ॐ विश्वन्दर्पण दृश्यमान नगरी तुल्यन्निजान्तर्गतं पश्यन्नात्मनि मायया बहिर्वोद्भूतं यथा निद्रया यः साक्षात् कुरुते प्रबोधसमये स्वात्मानमेवाद्वयं तस्मै श्रीगुरुमूर्तये नम इदं श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये। नारायणं पद्मभुवं वसिष्ठं शक्तिं च तत्पुत्रपराशरं च व्यासं शुकं गौडपदं महान्तं गोविन्दयोगीन्द्रमथास्य शिष्यं श्रीशङ्कराचार्यमथास्य पद्मपादं च हस्तामलकं च शिष्यं तन्तोटकं वार्तिककारमन्यान् अस्मद्गुरून् सन्ततमानतोऽस्मि। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः। परब्रह्मनिष्ठं स्वतो धर्मनिष्ठं अहिंसैकनिष्ठं स्वशिष्यै सुजुष्टं यतीनां वरिष्ठं गुरूणां गरिष्ठं दयानन्दरूपं मदाचार्यमीडे। नमः श्री परमार्थाय संसाराध्यासनाशिने श्रोत्रियब्रह्मनिष्ठाय तस्मै ब्रह्मविदे नमः। सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्। ॐ तपोभिः क्षीणपापानां शान्तानां वीतरागिणां मुमुक्षूणामपेक्ष्योऽयम् आत्मबोधो विधीयते। I welcome you all to the 26th class of the Atma Bodha series. And this is the concluding class in which we will see a summary of the entire text. As we have seen, Atma Bodha is a beautiful Vedantic text written by Bhagavad-pada Shankaracharya that covers all the important topics in Vedanta. The text consists of 68 verses and it can be broadly classified into 5 portions. The first portion, starting from verse 1 to verse 5. And during the course of this, I'll be referring to some of the important verses also. So I'll also give the important verse numbers as we move along. So you can also glance at those verses and recollect what we had discussed at that point. So the first portion, the first part is from verse 1 to verse 5, where Bhagavad-pada gives a preface for the entire text, followed by a spiritual roadmap, a roadmap for the entire spiritual journey, a roadmap to moksha. Then from verse 6 to verse 15, Bhagavad-pada talks about the problem of adhyasa or superimposition and why superimposition or adhyasa is the cause for all of our struggle and suffering. Then from verse 16 to verse 31 is the third part, and that talks about Atma Vichara, Atma Anatma Vivekaha, or self-inquiry culminating in self-knowledge. Then the fourth part is from verse 32 to verse 41, where Bhagavad-pada talks about Nididhyasanam, for the internalization, for the assimilation of Atma-jnanam, for the internalization, assimilation of self-knowledge. Then from verse 42 to verse 68 is the concluding fifth part, where Bhagavad talks about the benefit of the knowledge, the jnana phalam, and the glory of Brahman, the glory of moksha, the glory of this jnanam. So we'll take each of these parts and go through what we discussed, recall what we discussed there, and also look at some of the important verses. So the first part is the preface and the roadmap for the spiritual journey, the roadmap to moksha. So to set the context for this, we discussed the fundamental human problem. Every human being is stuck between a rock and a hard place, as we saw. The rock is his own conclusion that I am deficient, I am wanting, I am inadequate, I am apurna. And he cannot stand being apurna. And therefore, he tries to become purna. Note the word become purna in the world. But then the world is the hard place where he can never become purna no matter what he tries. At best, he gets fleeting moments of fulfillment in the world, but no lasting fulfillment. So no matter what he tries, he cannot become totally fulfilled. He cannot become purna. So this human being is now stuck between the rock and the hard place. He cannot be fulfilled with the conclusion that I am apurna, which is the rock, because he cannot stand being apurna. He cannot stand seeing himself as being limited. Nor can he become fulfilled in the world, no matter what he tries. So there is this perpetual struggle for purnatvam, for becoming fulfilled. And this perpetual struggle is what we call samsara. The perpetual struggle for fulfillment through the pursuit of the first three purusharthas, artha, kama, and dharma. This is the problem of samsara that every human being is suffering from. And therefore, what is the solution for this? So, as we said, when you have eliminated everything that is impossible, then whatever is left, no matter how improbable, must hold the key to the solution, assuming that a solution is possible at all. And we say that a solution must be possible in this case because this urge for purnatvam is a natural urge. It is not a cultivated desire. Like a desire for a BMW, for example, is a cultivated desire. And if one sees that it's too expensive and I cannot afford it, or it's too expensive to maintain it, one can also drop a cultivated desire. But a natural desire like hunger, thirst, etc., that's something that cannot be dropped. And if we see, every natural desire has got a solution in this creation also. Like hunger has got a solution in terms of food. Thirst has got a solution in terms of water. So this urge for purnatvam is a fundamental natural urge, and therefore Vedanta points out that it must have a solution. And therefore, if it has to have a solution and I can never become purna in this world, then the only thing left for me to examine is my own conclusion that I am deficient, wanting, and inadequate. That's the only thing left. This is where Vedanta begins. Vedanta points out that I want to become Purnaha, I want to become Purnaha. I have been too obsessed with this becoming Purnaha that I have forgotten to look at who this I is. Is this I really a Purnaha? That is the question. That's why Vedanta says Atma Vare Drashtavyaha. This Atma has to be known. The Atma has to be seen. And Vedanta says that you have not really known yourself, even though you may say that I know myself. Vedanta points out that all your struggles and sufferings are because you have not really known yourself. You have missed something very, very significant about yourself. What you say that you have known yourself is knowing yourself in relation to a few other things. You know yourself in relation to the body, the mind, your family, your possessions, your profession. But who are you intrinsically? That's the question. That you have not known is what Vedanta teaches. Therefore, Atma Vare Drishtabhyaha. Vedanta points out, Shokan Tarati Atmavit. The knower of Atma transcends all sorrow. And that is why one has to come to the study of Vedanta. So in the preface, which is basically the Anubandha Chatushtayam, we talked about four things: the Prayojanam, the Vishayaha, the Adhikari, and the Sambandha. So what is the Prayojanam for the study of Vedanta? It is really this Purnatvam, it is really this Moksha, which is the same Purnatvam that one has been unsuccessfully seeking by trying to become something or the other in this world. The same Purnatvam that one has been unsuccessfully seeking is what one gains, in quotes, through the study of Vedanta. This is the Prayojan. And what is the Vishayaha? The Vishayaha of Vedanta is not some object or the other in the world. We have enough universities and colleges that teach about objects of the world. The subject matter of Vedanta is the very subject, the I. Who am I? What is the nature of this I? And how is this I Purna? Then, as we said, these are the fourfold factors that bind the student to the study, the Anubandha Chatushtayam. Only when one understands this, only when these four factors are in place, then one takes up the study with commitment. Therefore, the third factor is the adhikari. The candidate must have certain qualifications. And that's why Bhagavad in the first verse starts with Mumukshunam hitarthaya Atma Bodho vidhiyate. That for the sake of the mumukshus, this Atma Bodha has been prescribed. So who's the mumukshu? Mokshu is moktum ichuhu, the one who's desirous of freedom. Freedom from what? Whenever we say freedom, there's always a question of freedom from what? It's freedom from samsara, freedom from this endless struggle for fulfillment through the pursuit of the first three purusharthas. So this implies that the mumukshu who has discovered the problem of samsara. Because most people don't even discover the problem of samsara. Most people just continue as if that is the only thing that is possible. They have not yet eliminated the impossible. And therefore, most people are just trying to work on becoming something, becoming fulfilled in the world. Mumukshu has determined that that is impossible. He has discovered the problem of samsara. And so now, having become wiser, he is now seeking to still become Purna. That becoming Purna is a fundamental natural urge. But now he's seeking that becoming Purna through some other means other than Artha, Kama, and Dharma. He's somehow trying to seek this more directly instead of going through the world. So he is a mumukshu. So he is a seeker of moksha, in other words. And then Bhagavad points out, Tapobhi Kshina Papanam Shantanam Vitaraginam. Kshina Papaha. The Kshina Papaha means that all these defects of the intellect that cause a delusion of priorities and goals in life. Delusion in terms of life's goals and priorities, such defects have gone away from his mind. He now understands that this Purnatvam cannot be sought by becoming something. He has to seek it more directly somehow. That somehow, how to seek it directly may not be clear. And that's why we have mumukshus trying all kinds of different spiritual things in the world. That's why further direction is necessary. So he has to be a kshina papaha, which means that he has some vivekaha. Vivekaha, that the ultimate goal of life is mokshaha and not arthaha, kama and dharma. And then he is also vitaragi. Vitaragi means one who has neutralized one's own ragas and dveshas, because the ragas and dveshas are what drag one into the world, helplessly into the world. They drag one into rearranging the world somehow in keeping with the ragas and dveshas. Whereas this person is a vitaragi, meaning he has neutralized the ragas and dveshas. And therefore, in other words, he has got vairagyam, which means he doesn't have the longing for, clinging to, dependence on objects or pursuits of the world, because he knows that they are all anitya. They can only give me anitya sukham, whereas what I am seeking is this nitya sukham. And then finally, Bhagavad says Shantanam, means he has got he is a Shanta. Shanta meaning one who has Shama. Shama meaning that the mind is available to me when I need it. And therefore, the Shama here can be taken to be a placeholder for the entire Shamadi Shatka Sampattihi, Shama, Dama, Titiksha, Uparama, Shraddha, Samadhanam. I will not go into each of these because we have discussed this several times in Tattva Bodha, and even in Atma Bodha we touched upon all of these. Now the question is, how does one gain all of these qualifications? And that's where Bhagavad points out with a single word, tapobhihi, meaning through tapas, through a life of tapas. The tapas here indicates a life of karma yoga and upasana yoga. Karma yoga takes care of this mala. We have seen the three defects are mala, vikshepa, and ajnanam. Karma yoga takes care of all this mala in terms of ragas and dveshas. Upasana yoga takes care of vikshepa, which is the restlessness of the mind. And finally, for ajnanam, one has to come to Vedanta. So this is the adhikari. And then finally, in the Anubandha Chatushtayam, we have the Sambandha. The Sambandha is what is the connection between the study of the Vishayaha and the Prayojanam. That also has to be clear. Because one is seeking the Prayojanam. But how, how does the Vishaya lead to the Prayojanam? How does the study of the Vishaya lead to the Prayojanam has to be clear. So one has to see the indispensable connection between the study and this Prayojanam, which is this Purnatvam that I am seeking. And therefore, the text is the revealer, Atma is the revealed. And the text is the producer of this Atma Jnanam. The text is the producer, the Atma Jnanam is the produced. And the Atma Jnanam is the means, and Mokshaha or Purnatvam is the end. So there are two hops here between the Prayojanam and Mokshaha or Purnatvam and and this text. We have the text in the beginning. So what is the connection between the text and this benefit, which is the Prayojanam, which is Purnatvam or Moksha? The study of the text produces this Atma Jnanam. That's an intermediate hop. And the Atma Jnanam makes me see that I am already Purna. So that is the connection. This connection has to be very clear, and one also has to be clear that there is no bypass route to this Purnatva. Right? Sometimes there are alternative routes. We can say, okay, perhaps I can take another route to get there. Right? So these two things have to be clear. What is the route from Atmajnanam to Purnatvam? That is the first thing that has to be clear. And the second thing that has to be clear is there is no other route. There is no other route. So this is what. So having looked at the preface, we come to the spiritual, the roadmap for the spiritual journey, where Bhagavad makes it clear that there is no other route to this Purnatvam other than through Atmajnanam. This is what Bhagavad is telling us in verse number 2. So verse number 2 and 3 are really clarifying the path to moksha. What is the roadmap to moksha? So bodhonya sadhanebhyo hi sakshan mokshaika sadhanam. Pakasya vannivat jnanam vina moksho na siddhyati. Jnanam vina moksho na siddhyati. So without knowledge, without this self-knowledge, moksha is impossible. Bhagavad makes it crystal clear. See, there are all these ideas. People talk about four paths, and etc. and things of that sort, right? So Bhagavad makes it very clear. Let's be very clear what the teaching of the Upanishads is, right? That without knowledge, without this Atma Jnanam, there is no moksha. Jnanam vina moksha na siddhyati. And what is the fundamental reason behind this? You have to also understand that, as we have seen, moksha is praptasya praptihi. It is accomplishing of the already accomplished. When the goal to be accomplished is already accomplished, then the only but not known as accomplished. The goal to be accomplished is already accomplished but not known as accomplished, then the only way to accomplish such a goal is to know that it's already accomplished. Just like the lady with the necklace. Lady with the necklace already had the necklace on her neck, but for some reason she thought that the necklace is missing. And therefore the lady with the necklace was trying to become the lady with the necklace. And she was searching all over the place. The only way her search can come to an end is by understanding that I am already the lady with the necklace that I am seeking to become. Similarly, in the vision of Vedanta, you are already Purna, already full, limitless, and complete. But I have taken myself to be a Purna. And then I am trying to become Purna. So this becoming Purna can never happen. That's why it's an endless struggle. And the only way this struggle and seeking to become Purna can end is by understanding that I am already Purna. And therefore, this comes only through Atma Jnanam, only through this self-knowledge. And that is why we say that knowledge is the only means for moksha. And then in the next verse number 3, Bhagavad says why action or karma can never lead to moksha. Avirodhitaya karma na vidyam vinivartaye. Vidya vidyam nihantyeva tejas timira sanghavat. Bhagavad says karma na avidyam vinivartaye. Karma can never remove this ignorance. Why? Why is it so? Why is it that karma can never remove ignorance? Because Bhagavad says in one word, avirodhitaya. Avirodhitaya. Meaning that karma is not opposed to ignorance. Why is karma not opposed to ignorance? Because karma is born out of ignorance. So what is the sequence? I cannot see the connection between karma, between ignorance and karma, between self-ignorance and karma. What is the connection? We say that the self-ignorance, when there is self-ignorance, I don't know who I am. When I don't know who I am, means I don't know I am already Purna. And therefore, I have taken myself to be Apurna. And from this Apurnatvam arises the desire to become Purna. So I say, I want to become Purna. And from this desire arises the action, and the aim of the action is to become Purna. So every action, whether it be pursuit of artha, kama, dharma, any worldly pursuit, for the sake of becoming Purna, is born out of this self-ignorance. And therefore it shares the same DNA, as we saw, as self-ignorance. So when you need a medicine, when you have to give a medicine, for example, if you give some antivirus or something of that sort, right? Then that has to have some kind of a DNA that is that destroys, like the antibacterial medicines, etc. That should be inimical to the thing it is targeting. So what is born out of the virus is another virus, right? And that, if you give, of course, there are, you can argue that these vaccines, etc., are also viruses, but they work in a slightly different manner. They work on the principle of improving the immunity. But in this case, we are looking for something inimical, right? So the child of the virus is only going to propagate the disease further. So here, any karma being born out of ignorance, it only amplifies the ignorance. It magnifies the ignorance. It perpetuates, reinforces the ignorance. It perpetuates the ignorance. It is not inimical to the ignorance. That is why karma na avidyam vinivartayet. And vidya eva avidyam nihanti. Knowledge alone is inimical to ignorance. And therefore, self-knowledge alone is inimical to self-ignorance. Therefore, self-knowledge alone destroys ignorance. Like Bhagavad says, light alone destroys darkness. There's no other way to remove darkness. Therefore, Bhagavad is providing a very clear roadmap here. Very clear roadmap, not beating about the bush. He's saying it in very certain terms about what the means is, which is jnanam and jnanam alone. And that is why every mumukshuhu must become a jigyasuhu. A seeker of moksha must become a seeker of knowledge. Otherwise, if the mumukshutvam is channeled in any other direction other than the seeking of knowledge, then that mumukshutvam will never culminate in moksha. That is the idea here. So with this, we conclude the first part, which is the preface and the journey, the roadmap to moksha. Then we come to the second part, which is from verse 6 to verse 15, where Bhagavad introduces adhyasa or superimposition as the cause for all of this struggle and suffering called samsara. Therefore, in verse 6, Bhagavad says, Samsara swapnatulyo hi ragadveshadi sankulaha swakale satyavat bhati prabodhe satya sat bhave. Here we recall the two fundamental satyam mithya principles. That every mithya has a satyam adhishthanam. Every mithya has a satyam adhishthanam. And if the satyam adhishthanam is not known, then that mithya itself is mistaken to be the satyam. So here Bhagavad says that samsaraha swapnatulyo hi. So this world in which I see myself as this limited individual wandering about in this separate world, struggling to become fulfilled in this separate world. This entire vision, that I have, it is mithya. It is like a dream. Samsaraha swapna tulyo hi. It is like a dream, Bhagavad says. So why is it a dream? Why is it like a dream? If we ask, whenever we say something is similar to something else, then we have to look into what is the similarity. Why are we saying it is similar? So samsaraha swapna tulyo hi. This entire experience that I have of this limited individual wandering about in this separate world and seeking for fulfillment, struggling for fulfillment, that whole thing is like a dream. Swapna tulyaha. Why is it swapna tulyaha? What is the similarity between the two? We say both are mithya. So the dream is clearly mithya. We understand it as mithya. This too is mithya. That's what Bhagavad Gita is saying. So how is the dream mithya? How is the swapna mithya? Because there I don't know the adhisthana. I don't know the adhishthanam, which is the waker. So not knowing the adhishthanam, I mistake something else to be the reality. When the adhishthanam is not known, the mithya is mistaken to be the reality. And therefore, I see this dream individual wandering about in this separate dream world. So as long as I am in the dream, I mistake that to be the reality in the absence of the knowledge of adhishthanam, which is the waker. And therefore, for the dreamer, like Swamiji says this quite often, for the dreamer, the dream is not a dream in dream. And therefore, the dream individual takes that to be the reality. And if that dream individual is told that what you're seeing is not real, what you're seeing is not real, and you are really the waker who has projected both this dream individual as well as the dream world, then he will not believe all that. He will say, this world is so solid. How are you saying it's not real? And therefore, swakale satyavat bhati. As long as one is in the dream, it appears to be very real. In the dream is real. Swakale satyavat bhati prabodhe satya sat bhavet. It's only on awakening that one understands that the whole thing was unreal. So when one knows the adhishthanam, which is what is the awakening from the dream, one comes to know I am the waker. That is the adhishthanam of both the dream individual as well as the dream world. When one knows the waker, one sees the falsity of the whole thing. And one knows that the waker alone is the Satya. So similarly in this world also, swakale satyavat bhati. As long as one is ignorant of what is the adhishthanam, this appears to be very real. This limited individual in this separate world, this whole thing appears to be very real. Swakale satyavat bhati. If I am told now that you are really that Brahman that has projected the entire thing, you are the one who has projected this entire thing. If I am told that, I'll say, what are you talking about? Prabodhe satya sat bhavet. But when one gains Brahma Jnanam, then one understands that this whole thing is just an appearance, it is not the reality. And therefore we talked about the four stages that are there in the dream as well as in this waking world that we see. Project, enter, forget, and suffer. So we see how this applies to the dream world. Then the waker has gone to sleep. The waker is in nidra. So we say that the waker has got the nidra shakti. Waker has got the nidra shakti. The nidra shakti has got two powers: the power to project and the power to conceal. The Vikshepa Shakti and Avarana Shakti. Nidra has got these two powers. So now the waker has gone to sleep and the Nidra Shakti projects this dream world. Both the dream individual as well as the dream world. So this is the first stage. project. And then what happens? The waker enters the dream individual and starts to say, I. The same I, which really is the waker, right? Now that has entered this dream body and dream mind and starts to say I. This is the entry. And then there is the third stage, which is forget. So this dream individual doesn't know that this I is really the waker. Because of the avarana shakti, because of the concealing power of nidra. And therefore this because the samanya jnanam is there, one says I. The vishesha jnanam of what this I is not there due to the avarana shakti. One takes oneself to be the dream individual. This is the forgetting stage. And then once one has taken oneself to be this limited dream individual in this separate world, then there is suffering. Whether one is being chased by tigers or one is roaming around in a desert. There's all kinds of nightmares and sufferings that happen in the dream, and all of that is very real for the one who is experiencing the dream. And this continues until one awakens. So project, enter, forget, and suffer, and the suffering continues until one awakens. And what is awakening? It is gaining the knowledge that I am the waker, gaining the knowledge of the adhisthana. So now here too there are these four stages. As we have seen in the beginning, there is only Brahman, the imperishable, all-pervading consciousness that is Brahman alone is there. And then there is a second factor which is not really a second factor because it doesn't have any independent existence. And the second factor is called Maya, which is the entire world in an unmanifest form. And then Maya Shakti has got two powers. Vikshepa Shakti and Avarana Shakti, the power to project and the power to conceal. Therefore, just as this dream world emerges from the waker with Nidra Shakti, this world that we see in front of us emerges from Brahman due to Maya Shakti, due to the Vikshepa Shakti of Maya, which is governed by the law of karma. The law of karma, the entire manifestation is because of the law of karma, as we have seen. So now there is this projection that happens, and this projection is what Bhagavad Pada talks about in verse 8 and verse 9, where Bhagavad Pada says, Upadane khiladhare jaganti parameshware sargasthitilayan yanti buddhani vavarini Satchidatmanyanusyute nitye Vishnau prakalpitaah Vyaktayah vividha sarvaha hatake katakadivat. So upadane khiladhare jaganti parameshware. So in this Parameshwara, who is Parameshwara? The Brahman with the Maya Shakti, the Parameshwara. So upadane, and this Brahman is the upadana karanam. Vivarta upadana karanam, as we have seen, the changeless material cause. So in this Parameshwara, who is the upadana karanam, Brahman with Maya Shakti, arise all these worlds, jaganti, sargasthiti, layan, yanti, these worlds arise like bubbles arise in water. And then what happens? Satchidatmanya anusyute nitye Vishnau prakalpitaha. So in Vishnu again, who is Brahman plus Maya, in this Vishnu, all these beings arise like ornaments arise from gold. Vyaktaya vividha sarvaha hatake katakadivate. Like ornaments arise from gold. Now Bhagavad Pada is pointing out here that there is no new substance that is created. What is created is only names and forms, like ornaments. When ornaments arise from gold or bubbles arise in water, there is no new substance that is created. What is created is only varieties of names and forms. Varieties of names and forms are thrown out by the Vikshepa Shakti of Maya. This is the projection stage. And then there is entry, as we have seen. Yathakasho, so in verse 10, Bhagavad says, Yathakasho Hrishikesho Nanopadhigato Vibhu Tad Bhedat Bhinnavad Bhati Tannashe Kevalo Bhavet. So Yathakasho Hrishikesha Nanopadhigataha Vibhu. So space is all pervading. Vibhu, Yatha Vibhu Akashaha. Space, the all pervading, like all pervading space. When pots arise in space, then the space as though gets enclosed, enters these pots, gets enclosed within these pots. As we have seen, space really does not get enclosed, but it appears to get enclosed in these pots, and then we start talking about a multiplicity or plurality of spaces. We talk about small space, big space, pot space, and room space, etc. Varieties of things can be talked about. And therefore, there's this plurality of spaces that happens. So similarly here as well, Brahman with the Maya Shakti projects all of this world and all of these upadhis of the various beings, the Sthula Sharira and Sukshma Sharira, all of those come about. And then Brahman as though gets enclosed within each of these upadhis. And then we start to talk about a multiplicity of consciousnesses. Even though there's one all-pervading consciousness, we talk about a plurality, multiplicity of consciousnesses. And then in the presence of consciousness, this Sukshma Shariram and Stula Sharira, they all borrow. Sukshma Shariram borrows consciousness, as we have seen, because it's made of very fine matter. And then it also lends consciousness to the Sthula Sharira. Therefore, with borrowed consciousness, there is sentiency that arises in these upadhis. And then this being starts to say, I am, I am. So this is the entry of consciousness into all of these upadhis. So we talked about project and enter. Then the third stage is forget. So now the avarana shakti of Maya comes in and conceals the adhishthanam, that is Brahman. So if this concealment had not happened, and if this being said, I am, he would follow it by saying, I am Brahman. I am the all-pervading consciousness. And then there would be no such suffering and struggle, etc., because he knows Brahman is Purna. He knows the nature of Brahman. If all of this is known, there would be no struggle and suffering. Just like in the dream, if one knows that one is the waker, then there cannot be any struggle or suffering in the dream, as long as the knowledge is very clear. So here also, if I had very clearly known that I am Brahman, that is Purna, ever Purna, then there can be no struggle and suffering. But the Avarana Shakti of Maya comes in and conceals the nature of the Adhishtha. Conceals the nature of the Adhishthanam and doesn't conceal it completely also. That's why this I am is there. What I am is not known. Samanya Jnanam is there, Vishesha Jnanam is not there, and therefore it is followed by Adhyasa, superimposition. And therefore, one says, as Bhagavad Pada says in verse 11, Nanopadhivashadeva jati varnashramadayah atmanyaropitas rasavarnadi bhetavat. Atmani aropitaha. Nanopadhivashat jati varna ashramadayah atmani aropitaha. So all of the attributes that belong to the anatma body and mind, like jati, varna, ashrama, etc., my age, my color of my skin, and my emotions, all of those, whatever they be, they are all superimposed on the Atma. So I say I am, but I follow it by saying I am this body, I am this mind, and I have such and such attributes, these limiting attributes. So I am, in short, a limited being. Therefore, there has been a mix-up of Atma and Anatma. One ends up with a mixing up of Atma and Anatma. So instead of saying, I am Brahman, I say, I am this Apurnaha Samsari Jivaha. So project, enter, forget. And then this is invariably followed by the suffering. That's what Bhagavad says in verse 15. Panchakoshadi yogena tattanmaya iva sthitah shuddhatma nilavastradi yogena sphatiko yatha. So really speaking, the Satyam and Mithya cannot have any real connection or relationship. Satyam cannot have any real connection or relationship with Mithya. Because only two things in the same order of reality can have a relationship. Like we have said this, our favorite example, that this person who sees this girl in his dream, he cannot get married to this girl in the dream. There cannot be a relationship between a person and the girl that the person saw in his dream, because they belong to different orders of reality. So similarly, between Satyam and Mithya belong to different orders of reality. There cannot be any connection between the two. But then, due to self-ignorance, the impossible happens. Therefore, this Atma gets mixed up with Anatma. Why? Due to ignorance. And therefore, as we have seen, this Atma is said to then have the attributes of the Anatma. I say, like, I am male, I am female, I am 40 years old, or I am emotional, I am sad, etc. All of these various superimpositions happen. I was born on such and such a date. I will die sometime in the future. All these states and attributes of the Anatma Upadhis are superimposed on the Atma. And all of this, really speaking, right, is like this, as Bhagavad says here, Shuddhatma Nilavastradi Yogena Spatiko Yatha. Beautiful example that we have seen of this crystal placed next to a blue cloth, Nilavastradi. So when it's placed next to the blue cloth, the crystal appears to be blue. So it is really, nothing has changed in the crystal at all. Really speaking, the crystal is not affected even a wee bit by the presence of this blue cloth. But then the blueness appears in the crystal. It is just an appearance. It is not the reality. And the one who doesn't know the nature of the crystal, who doesn't have the Vishesha Jnanam that this crystal is fundamentally unaffected, such a person will take the crystal to be blue. He will give reality to the blueness that is seen in the crystal. And therefore, he is deluded. Such a person is deluded. And the delusion will continue as long as he doesn't understand the nature of the crystal. The delusion goes the moment he knows that the crystal is fundamentally colorless. So similarly, all of this adhyasa, where I am superimposing all these attributes of the body and mind upon the Atma, will continue until I awaken, until I know the adhishthanam, that I am Brahman, and I alone have projected this entire world. And being the Satyam Brahma, I am fundamentally unaffected by this Mithya body, mind, and the Mithya world. So this is really the awakening, the equivalent of the awakening that ends the suffering. So there is this four-stage similarity: project, enter, forget, suffer. That is why Bhagavad says, samsaraha swapna tulyo hi. So then, with this background on adhyasa, we come to the third part, from verse 16 to verse 31, which deals with the topic of self-enquiry. So then what is the solution What is the solution to this entire struggle and suffering? So I have to awaken from this dream-like samsara. One has to awaken. And how does one awaken? One has to stop giving reality to this, this limited individual and to this separate world. So one has to remove this adhyasa. Adhyasa means giving reality to the unreal. Because I'm not understanding the adhishthanam. So I have to stop giving reality to this limited individual and this separate world. So how do I stop giving reality to this? The ajnanam of the adhishthanam has to go. And how will the ajnanam of the adhishthanam go? The jnanam of the adhishthanam has to come. Like this individual awakens from the dream by knowing that I am the waker. Similarly, I have to know the adhishthanam here as well, that I am really Brahman. This adhishthanam can be known only in one way. The adhishthanam Brahman can be known only in one way, as I am Brahman. There is no other way of knowing Brahman. Because any other way of knowing Brahman will make Brahman an object. And any object is always limited. And therefore, one has to know, I am Brahman. But then if the jiva is directly taught that you are the Adhishthanam Brahma, that's like in the dream talking to this dream individual and telling him you are the waker who has projected this whole thing. He is going to present hundreds of arguments as to why what I am saying is false. He will not accept it. So similarly here as well, if this individual is directly told that you are the Brahman that has projected this entire thing, he will not accept it. He will say, he will give varieties of arguments why that is not the case. Because this whole thing is so solid, I can understand the dream world is unreal, okay? Because I clearly see it as false. But here, what is the proof? And all of that, there'll be a lot of questions. Why does this happen? Because this identification with the body mind is complete. Complete identification. The mix-up is complete. Mix-up between Atma and Anatma is complete. And therefore, if there is a certain methodology that Vedanta follows in order to communicate this knowledge. And it's a three-stage process. As we have seen, Brahma Satyam, Jagan Mithya, Jivo Brahmaiva Na Paraha. The first Brahma Satyam, Jagan Mithya has to be understood. That is why Srishti Prakriya is there. With the Srishti Prakriya, the Upanishads are really teaching that Brahman is Satyam, this Jagat is Mithya, by presenting Brahman as the cause and the world as an effect. So this is the Srishti Prakriya which Bhagavad Pada touched upon in verses 8 and 9 as we saw. Hatake, Katakadivat, Budbudani, Varini, etc. Bhagavad Pada is really talking about the creation of this world. There is no creation of a new substance. Meaning this world is Mithya. So Brahma Satyam, Jagan Mithya has to be understood, but then still Brahman is a remote Brahman. In Srishti Prakriya, Brahman is a remote Brahman. Then subsequent to that, one has to come to Jivo Brahmaiva Naparaha. That is, Jiva is not separate from Brahman. But in order to understand that, one has to first go through this Atma Anatma Vivekaha. That has to be done. This Atma, one has to understand that there is this principle called Atma, which is separate from this Anatma. And finally, Atma is equated to Brahman through the Mahavakya Vichara, which is the third stage. So, Srishti Prakriya, Atma, Anatma, Viveka, followed by Mahavakya Vichara. These are the three stages of communicating this knowledge. So, Bhagavad Pada already talked about Srishti Prakriya, Brahma Satyam, Jagan Mithya. He already talked about. But now, Atma, Anatma, Viveka is the next thing that has to follow. So as we see that the Atma Anatma mix-up has happened, mix-up that is technically impossible has been made possible. And why has this happened? Because of ajnanam, because of self-ignorance. And therefore, in Atma, Anatma, Viveka, I have to separate this Atma from this Anatma. But there is no physical separation that is possible or required. Physical separation of the Atma from Anatma is neither possible nor is it required. Because really speaking, there has been no mix-up at all. Really speaking, the mix-up has not happened at all. Then where has the mix-up happened? The mix-up has happened in the mind, in one's understanding. And that's why Bhagavad says that one has to do the Atma and Atma Viveka and gives this in verse 16. Bhagavad talks about Vapustushadibhi koshaihi yuktam yuktya atmanam antaram shuddham vivichya tandulam yatha. So just like the rice is separated from the husk, how through this banging, one does this banging to separate the rice from the husk. So similarly, one has to do this banging to separate the Atma from the Anatma. But the rice and the husk belong to the same order of reality, so there has been a real mix-up. But in case of Atma and Anatma, they belong to different orders of reality. There has not been a real mix-up. The mix-up has been only due to ignorance. And therefore, there is no physical separation. So these blows are not these physical blows to separate Atma from Anatma, but it is yukti avaghatataha. These are blows given through yukti or through reason and logic, which is based upon the Shruti, upon the Vedanta Shastra, the logic that eventually leads me to the vision of Vedanta. That kind of blows with logic and yukti I have to use in order to separate the Atma from Anatma. So I have to understand what this consciousness, Atma, what this consciousness principle really is. And this is where we talked about the 5 principles of consciousness, 5 features of consciousness. That consciousness is not a part, product, or property of the body-mind. Consciousness is an independent principle that pervades this body-mind and enlivens the body-mind. And consciousness is not limited by the boundaries of the body-mind. And consciousness continues to exist even after this body-mind and all body-mind disintegrate. And the consciousness that continues to exist even after all the body-minds disintegrate cannot be transacted with, not because it is not existent, but because there is no medium to transact with it. So these are the 5 principles of consciousness in general that we have talked about, and Bhagavad touches upon these in different ways in the various verses that follow in this third part. So in verse 17, for example, Bhagavad says, Sada sarvagatopyatma na sarvatra bhasate buddha veva bhaseta swacheshu pratibimbavat. So even though the Atma is all-pervading, Sada Sarvagatopyatma na sarvatra bhasate, the Atma is not seen everywhere, but it is only perceived in the Buddhi. Buddhau eva bhaseta. Swacheshu pratibimbavat, like there is the sun, for example, and the sunlight is all-pervading. But then it is very clearly perceived only in this mirror, which is a very smooth, fine surface. So in such smooth reflecting surfaces, we can see a reflection of the sun. So similarly, this all-pervading consciousness is perceived in the intellect, in the buddhi. Then in verse 18, Bhagavad talks about consciousness being an independent principle, as we have seen in the 5 principles of consciousness, because here Bhagavad says, Dehendriya manobuddhi prakritibhyo vilakshanam. That this consciousness is a separate, independent principle, which is separate from this body, mind, intellect, etc. And it is the witness of all their functions. Tadvritti sakshinam vidyat. Prabhupada says, Tadvritti sakshinam vidyat. So this consciousness is the witness principle. It witnesses all of the body, mind, etc., and all of their activities. Like Rajavat, like this king who's sitting in his throne, on his throne, and then he just is a witness of all the activities that are going on, what their ministers and what the various courtiers are doing. He's just a witness of all of that, uninvolved witness of all of that. And then Bhagavad talks about in verses 19 to 23. Bhagavad is talking about how the activities and the attributes of the body, mind, senses, etc. are superimposed on the Atma because of Atma Ajnanam. Like we have said, Atma Bodha gives various beautiful examples for every concept. which are worth remembering because they are very relatable examples. Like Bhagavad says here, Drishyate abhreshu dhavatsu dhavanniva yatha shashi in verse 19. And 19 to 23, these examples are there. So like this, when we see the clouds moving, we see the clouds moving in front of the moon, but then it looks like the moon is moving. Really speaking, the movement belongs to the clouds, but it is wrongly attributed to the moon. So similarly, all of these activities and attributes of the body mind are attributed to the Atma. Or like blueness of the sky, right? Gagane Neelatadivat, Bhagavad says. So the space has got no attribute of blueness. The blueness is a phenomenon that arises because of dust particles and the scattering of sunlight due to dust particles. The space has fundamentally not got this blueness, but again, this blueness is wrongly attributed to the space when somebody says that the sky is blue. And so on. Bhagavad gives these kinds of examples to indicate all of these superimpositions that happen. So I say I am young, I am old, I am male, I am female, I am a karta, I am a bhokta. Kartritvam, bhoktritvam, ragadvesha. I have got ragadveshas. So it is not just done by lay human beings, but even by philosophers and intellectuals. Like for example, Bhagavad Pada takes specifically, he doesn't mention the Nayayikas, but he's referring to the Nayayikas, who say that raga, sukha, dukkha, and Ichha dvesha is basically raga dvesha, sukha dukkha, etc. They are all properties of the Atma, the Nayayika says. Bhagavad Pada is refuting such philosophers who superimpose all kinds of things upon the Atma. And Bhagavad Pada also mentions that all of these body, mind, senses, etc., they are all enlivened because of the presence of the Atma, because of this borrowed consciousness. Exactly like human beings do their work in the morning in the presence of the sun. The human beings engage in various activities. Or we have taken the example of these solar powered toys. So all of these solar powered toys, they work in the presence of the sun. But the sun itself is not involved in whatever activities the solar powered toys are doing. So similarly, Atma is there, it is presence, it's a presence, in the presence of which the body mind get enlivened and do their activities, but the Atma is fundamentally not a karta also. And therefore the Atma is akarta. It has got no karma sambandha. It has no connection with the actions performed by the body and the mind. And it is also abhokta, meaning that it has got no karma phala sambandha also. This body and the mind go through the karma phala. But then the Atma is not the sufferer or the enjoyer also. And then in verses 25 and 26, Bhagavad points out that Atma is not this Pramata also. So he's negated Karta Bhokta, and then he negates the Atma being a Pramata or a knower also. Because the knowership doesn't belong to the Atma, because the Atma is changeless. Knowership involves change. So Atma, pure Atma cannot be a knower because it is changeless. The pure mind also, if you take the mind separately, cannot be a knower because it is jada, it is inert. So how does this knower arise? The knower arises when the mind is there in the presence of this Atma. Then the mixture is the knower. The mixture of the Atma and Anatma is the knower. Like we saw the example of this mirror in a room, where you have a room with a lamp, and then there is a window, and it's completely dark outside. So now you can use a mirror to direct the light of the lamp. You can direct it to various things outside, and there's a patch of light which illumines various things outside. Now the mirror by itself, if we switch off the light, then the mirror by itself cannot illumine anything. Or if we keep that light and remove the mirror, then the light cannot go out and illumine the various things. So you need the mirror, you need the light in order to illumine the various things outside. So what happens in the presence of the mirror and the light, there is this phenomenon of reflected light that comes in, which can be directed to various things to illuminate. So similarly, the mind alone cannot illumine anything outside because it is jada, it doesn't possess its own consciousness. And the Atma alone cannot illumine anything because it is changeless. We are using the term illumine in the sense of knowing something. Process of knowing involves change, and Atma is nirvikaraha, therefore it cannot know anything by itself. And therefore, in the presence of Atma, in the mind, there arises this phenomenon that we call reflected consciousness or borrowed consciousness. And this reflected consciousness is really what knows. It is the jnata, it is the drashta, it is the seer, it is the hearer, taster, smeller, toucher, etc. But in the absence of the knowledge of the Atma, that I am the Atma, one mistakes the Anatma to be the Atma. So one says that I am the seer, hearer, taster, smeller, toucher. This is because one has not understood that I am the changeless Atma. Therefore, Bhagavad says, Jnata drashteti muhyati. One is deluded to think that I am the jnata, I am the knower, I am the seer. This is a delusion because of self-ignorance and superimposition. And now, having done this Atma Anatma Viveka, then Bhagavad comes to the Mahavakya Vichara. In verse 30 and verse 31. So Bhagavad says, Nishidhya Nikhilopadhin Neti Neti Tivakyataha Vidyadaikyam Mahavakyahi Jivatma Paramatmanoho. So Atma, after having done this Atma Anatma Vivekaha, one has to come to the Mahavakya Vichara to understand the identity of this Jivatma and Paramatma. And therefore one can argue here that differences between Jivatma and Paramatma are enormous. Because one takes the Vachyartha, the total meaning of the word. In the word Jiva, in the word, the meaning, the total meaning of the word Jivatma comprises of the Sharira Trayam, the three bodies, and the reflected consciousness and the original consciousness. So there are these five things in the total meaning of the word Jivatma. In the total meaning of the word Paramatma, there is the Prapanchatrayam, the Sthula Sukshma Karana Prapancha, and the reflected consciousness and the original consciousness. So there are these five components in the total meaning of the word Paramatma. So the Shruti, the Upanishads are equating the Jivatma and Paramatma. And so one can say the differences are enormous. This equation doesn't make sense. But we say that this equation is like the statement, this Devadattaha is that Devadattaha. This old Devadattaha that you are seeing in front of you is that young Devadattaha that you played with 60 years ago. So in this, the differences are enormous between the two Devadattas. But if I have to understand the meaning of this sentence, I have to go from the Vachyatha to the Lakshyatha, from the total meaning of the word to the intended meaning of the word. And therefore, Bhagavad Pada says, Nishidhya nikhilopadhin, set aside the upadhis. If you keep the upadhis around, you will not understand the Mahavakya. So you have to discard the upadhis, and then one sees that there is one original consciousness. I set aside the Shariratrayam, and with that the reflected consciousness goes. I set aside the Prapanchatrayam, the reflected consciousness goes. What is left is this one all-pervading original consciousness. That is the identity the Mahavakya is talking about. But then one can argue that the differences are in majority, the identity is in minority. The differences are with respect to four upadhis, Shariratrayam and Prapanchatrayam, vastly different. And the reflected consciousness here is small pervading, that reflected consciousness is all pervading. How can you talk about identity when the differences are enormous and in majority? This is where Bhagavad Pada says, आविद्यकं शरीरादि दृश्यं बुद्बुतवत्सरम् एतद् विलक्षणं विद्यात् अहं ब्रह्मेति निर्मलम् in verse 31. So Bhagavad Pada says, yes, the differences are there, but they are all avidyakam. Avidyakam meaning they are all products of Maya. If you see, the Shariratrayam is there, the reflected consciousness is there, the Prapanchatrayam is there, the reflected consciousness is there. All of these are either Maya or products of Maya. And since Maya does not have an independent existence other than Brahman, they are all Mithya. They are all due to Mithya. The differences are due to Mithya, and therefore the differences are Mithya. And therefore, this identity alone is Satyam. This identity is the reality. The differences are not the reality. This has to be understood. And therefore, before the Mahavakya, the Jiva says that the Atma is parichinnaha, meaning this Atma is limited because of self-ignorance. The Atma is limited. And then Brahman is parokshaha, Brahman is something remote. But then after Mahavakya, one equates, one says that Brahman is this Atma. Meaning that the parokshatvam of Brahman goes away, the remoteness of Brahman goes away, because that Brahman is this Atma that is here and now. This Atma itself is that Brahman. That Brahman is this Atma. And therefore, one understands that it is from me, this Atma that is here and now, this real meaning of the word I, that is here and now, this Atma, it is from this Atma that is Brahman that this entire world has emerged, is sustained, and into which this world resolves. The parokshatvam of Brahman goes away. And the parichinnatvam of Atma, the limitation that I had superimposed on the Atma also goes away, because one knows that Atma is that Brahman. This Atma is that Brahman, and therefore this Atma being one with Brahman, it doesn't have any limitation of space, time or object. And therefore this Atma being Brahman is all pervading. This Atma being Brahman is imperishable. And this Atma being Brahman doesn't have any object-wise limitation, because it is the Satyam. It is the content of every object. And therefore, one sees that there is only this one Eka Aparoksha Aparichinna Brahmatma. This is the only entity which is real, and that I am. Eka Aparoksha Aparichinna Brahmatma, I am. which means that I am this Brahman, which is the Aham Brahmasmi Jnanam effectively. That I am Brahman, whose nature is moksha, and therefore there is no trace of samsara in me. No trace of samsara in me. I am already free of this samsara. Moksha is not something that has to be attained. I was never bound in order to be liberated. I am a Nitya Muktaha. I am the Nitya Muktaha Brahman. This is the Jnanam that one comes to through the culmination of this self-inquiry through the Mahavakya Vichara. So with this, we end part 3, which is the topic of self-inquiry. And then we come to part 4, which is the Nididhyasanam, topic of Nididhyasanam for internalizing this knowledge. So after Shravanam and Mananam, in a qualified aspirant, there's this rise of this doubtless knowledge that I am Brahman. So because of this, identification with the body and mind due to ignorance goes. However, the identification with the body and the mind due to habitual tendencies can persist. Like we have seen the example of the beggar. The beggar becomes a millionaire because of inheriting something, a lot of wealth. But then even though he now knows, and he has even seen the bank statement, for example, telling him that he has got a lot of wealth, he gets up in the morning and he puts on his rags and then starts to extend his begging bowl. So it takes a while for this whole thing to sink in, for him to understand that he doesn't have to continue with the same old lifestyle in the sense of his limited miserable lifestyle. He doesn't have to look at himself as a miserable person anymore who was begging. So this transformation takes time. So he has to reflect on the knowledge and the implications of it continuously in order to bring about a change in his day-to-day behavior. So one has to get accustomed to the new reality, as we had seen this other example also, where a person is accustomed to walking through a door. But then the house has been remodeled, the door has been now closed. There is a wall there. But then the person habitually goes through the same door which doesn't exist now, purely out of the force of habit. So he has to get accustomed to the new reality. So I have now understood that I am this Brahman and I am not the samsari jiva. Moksha is not a goal to be accomplished. But then one has to get accustomed to the new reality. Otherwise, the samsari jiva can come out purely due to the force of habit, especially in crisis-like situations where the habitual mind takes over. And therefore, Vedanta, the teaching of Vedanta has to go into one's subconscious habitual mind. And for this, as we saw the example of the pickle has to marinate in the brine for a length of time. Similarly, one has to marinate the mind in this Vedantic teaching for a length of time. This is what Nididhyasanam is. So Nididhyasanam is not for gaining Jnanam, because the Jnanam has to be gained through Atma Vichara done during Shravanam and Manam, culminating in the Mahavakya Vichara, which culminates in the knowledge that I am Brahman. So Jnanam has to come through Shravanam and Mananam, not through Nididhyasanam. And Nididhyasanam is not for gaining moksha also, because as we have seen, the Jnanam is that I don't even have to gain moksha because moksha is my very nature. Therefore, Nididhyasanam is not for gaining moksha also. Nididhyasanam is not for any special experience also. Because for one who has this jnanam and who knows that moksha is my very nature, what is he going to do with some special experience? Nor can any special experience lead to jnanam or moksha, because every experience is limited. And therefore, Nididhyasanam is not for jnanam, not for gaining moksha, not for gaining any special experience, but it's purely to correct, to reorient my habitual tendencies. Viparita, viparita bhavana nivrittihi, that is what Nididhyasanam is for. And therefore, in verse 37, Bhagavad-pada says, Evam nirantarabhyasta brahmaivasmiti vasana harati avidya vikshepan roganiva rasayanam. So, evam nirantarabhyasta, meaning that one has to repeatedly invoke this knowledge in Nididhyasana. Nirantara abhyasta. And then, then this knowledge becomes like a new habit that enters the subconscious mind. Harati avidya vikshepan. So it weakens the old habitual thinking patterns. So jiva bhava durbalikaranam, brahma bhava prabalikaranam. So there is this old habitual pattern. What is the old habitual pattern? That I am the limited jiva. It's called the triangular format, as we said. There are three things: Jiva, Jagat, and Ishvara. I am the limited Jiva that is persecuted by the separate world that is the persecutor. So I am persecuted, the world is the persecutor. And every time I am persecuted by the world, I need a savior, Ishvara, who I can run to save myself. This is the triangular format. This is the vision of the Ajnani. But then through the jnanam, through nididhyasanam, one comes to this binary format. And what is the binary format? Not the triangular format. The binary format that I am the adhishthanam of the jiva, jagat and ishvara. I am Brahman, that is the very adhishthanam of all three. So I am, and everything else is anatma, is mithya. I am the Satyam Brahma, all else is mithya, anatma. So I am not the jiva, I am not this limited jiva. And I cannot be persecuted as this adhishthanam. I cannot be persecuted by this world because I am utterly unaffected by this world. Whatever happens in this world cannot touch me. And therefore, I don't need to be saved also. And therefore, I don't need an Ishvara who is a savior. I don't need to be saved. And therefore, this is the new binary format, habit that has to come in through this repeated invocation of the knowledge that I am not the limited sadhaka that needs to gain moksha. I am not even a limited sadhaka. As Brahman, I am Siddha. I have already accomplished what needs to be accomplished. There is nothing remaining for me to be accomplished. And therefore, I am not this limited sadhaka that has to even gain moksha. I don't even need to gain moksha because moksha is my very nature. So this understanding has to become firm. This is what we call Brahmanishtha or Jnananishtha. So this is what Nididhyasanam brings one to. So then we come to the concluding part. In part 5, where Bhagavad Pada talks about the Jnana Phalam, the benefits of this knowledge, and the glory of Brahman, Jnanam, this Jnanam, and the glory of Moksha. So benefits of the knowledge, Bhagavad Pada talks about. First one is Ajnana Nivrittihi. So this final part is from verse 42 to verse 68. So here Bhagavad Pada talks about Ajnana Nivrittihi, the removal of this Ajnanam. Evam Atmaranau Dhyanamatane Satatang Krite Uditavagati Jwala Sarvajnane Dhanam Tahe. So here Bhagavad Pada gives the example of the fire that is produced in a Vedic ritual by the churning of wood. So this churning of the wood gives rise to sparks, which are then transferred to some cotton, and the cotton catches fire, and then that is put in the homakunda, where it becomes a bigger fire that consumes all the oblations. So similarly, with the churning of the Mahavakyas that is done during Shravanam and Mananam, the churning of the Mahavakyas done in a qualified mind, there arises these sparks of knowledge that then become a steady flame of knowledge in Nididhyasanam, steady fire of knowledge in Nididhyasanam, that then consumes all the oblations. The very first oblation is all of this Ajnanam, Sarvajnane Dhanam Dahe. And the second oblation is all of the Adhyasa, which Bhagavad talks about in verse 45. Sthano Purushavat Bhrantya Krita Brahmani Jivata Jivasya Tatvike Rupe Tasmin Drishte Nivartate. So like this stump of a tree is mistaken to be a Purusha, mistaken to be a thief, for example, in semi-darkness. But when one directs torchlight upon it, one knows that this is not the thief I had mistaken it to be, but is actually a stump of a tree. So similarly here, with this knowledge, one understands oneself as one really is. In the absence of this Vishesha Jnanam, I had mistaken myself to be this limited Jiva, but with this Vishesha Jnanam that I am Brahman, one understands that I am Brahman, not this Jiva. And therefore, this Adhyasa of the Jivatvam also goes away. Adhyasa nivrittihi. And then ahankara mamakara nivrittihi, when one understands that I am Brahman, which belongs to a higher order of reality, I have no connection with this body and the mind, really speaking. Because there cannot be any real connection between the higher order of reality and what is there in a lower order of reality. And therefore this ahankara, which is this notion that I am the body mind, this notion of notional ahankara also goes away. And when the ahankara goes away, then the mamakara cannot remain, because the mamakara that I have this family, I have these possessions, I have this possession, that mamakara depends upon the ahankara. Only when there is a connection with the body mind can there be a connection with the other things. And therefore, when this notional ahankara goes away with the understanding that I am Brahman, the notional mamakara also goes away. Ahankara, mamakara nivrittihi. And then there is a total transformation in the vision of the jnani. And Bhagavad says in verse 47, Samyak vijnanavan yogi swatmanyeva akhilan jagat ekanja sarvam atmanam ikshate jnana chakshusha. So this jnani, with this jnanam, he is samyak vijnanavan, meaning he knows this very well. That Swatmani eva akhilam jagat, this entire world is in me. The world is mithya, I am the Satyam, therefore I alone am. Sarvatmanam ikshate. Everything is the Atma alone. Atma alone is, meaning I alone am. This is the vision of the Jnani. Total transformation in the vision of the Jnani. And then the next benefit is the samsara nivrittihi. In verse 49, Bhagavad says, Jivan muktastu tad vidvan purvopadhi gunas tyajet satchidananda rupatvat bhavet brahmarakitavat. So the one who knows that I alone am, being the very upadana karanam, being the very material cause, I alone am, he becomes a Jivan Muktaha, meaning he is present in the Upadhis, but he is not affected by the Upadhis, Purvopadhi Gunas Tyajet. And then finally, Bhagavad talks about, in verse 53, Bhagavad talks about Videha Muktihi. Upadhi vilayat Vishnu nirvishesham vishen munihi jale jalam viyat pyopnihi tejas tejasi va yatha. So when the body falls, when the prarabdha is exhausted, the body falls. But at that point, for the jnani, the sanchita karma is destroyed, the agami karma is avoided, and therefore there is no more fuel remaining to sustain the sukshma and sthula shariras, sukshma and karana shariras. So the Sthula Sharira merges into the Sthula Prapancha, the Sukshma Sharira merges into the Sukshma Prapancha, the Karana Sharira merges into the Karana Prapancha. The Vyashti Chidabhasa, the reflected consciousness, merges into the total reflected consciousness. And just this original consciousness, this enclosed consciousness, merges with the total original consciousness. And this merger is a figurative merger. There is no movement involved. It's just like pot space merging into total space, and the pot goes. The pot never really separated the pot space from the total space. It only seemingly separated, and with the pot going away, even the seeming separation goes. Therefore, the Jivan Muktaha becomes one with Brahman. He was already one with Brahman. The seeming separation also goes away. This is the Videha Mukti. And then Bhagavad talks about the glory of Brahman, glory of knowledge, the glory of moksha. In verse 54, Bhagavad says, Yallabhan na paro labha, yat sukhan na param sukham, yat jnanat na param jnanam, tat brahmetyavadharayet. Bhagavad says there is no greater gain than this gain of moksha. Because every other gain, like this gain of artha, kama, and dharma, they all have their limitations. They are all gains of mithya, first of all. And then all of that gain involves all of this strain and struggle, that it cannot really be called a gain. And it doesn't really fundamentally change one's apurnaha status. One remains apurnaha with all those gains. And therefore, those gains cannot really be compared with the gain of Brahman, the gain of moksha. This is the greatest gain. And similarly, there is no sukham greater than Brahma sukham. Because every other sukham is mixed with dukkham. Whereas this sukham alone is the unadulterated sukham, the Atma sukham or moksha sukham. And there is no greater knowledge compared to the gain of Brahma Jnanam. Because every other knowledge is really keeps the limited pramata around. One remains an apurna pramata after gaining any other knowledge. And similarly, every other knowledge is a gain of knowledge of mithya only. It cannot be called real knowledge. It is like knowing the rope as a snake. Every other knowledge is knowledge of mithya. It is like knowing the rope as a snake. Whereas Brahma Jnanam alone is the knowledge of reality. Therefore, there is no greater knowledge. And finally, Bhagavad concludes the text, verse 68, by saying that this Atma Tirtham is the greatest Tirtham. One can go to various other Tirthams, but all of those other Tirthams are small pervading. They have to be visited. There is struggle involved in visiting the various Tirthas. And then one has to have this consideration of time, space, etc. Here says, Digdesha Kaladhyanapeksha Sarvagam. So for all other tirthas, there's consideration of time, consideration of place, consideration of direction, etc. But the Atma is all-pervading. The Atma is ever present. And therefore, wherever I go, the Atma is there. Whenever I go, the Atma is there. And therefore, the Atma Tirtham is always there for me. And therefore, compared to all other tirthas, this Atma Tirtha is the greatest tirtha. And how do I take a dip in this Atma Tirtham? By invoking the knowledge that I am Brahman. Just invoking this knowledge is taking a dip in this Atma Tirtham. That is the greatest dip that is possible. Because it makes one all-pervading. Because one knows that as this Brahman, I am all-pervading. Sarvavit, Sarvagataha, I am all-pervading. And Sarvavit, I have known what is essentially there to be known. I have known that. Because as Brahman being the very Upadana Karanam, I have known the Upadana Karanam, and therefore I have known every product that is there. And As this Brahman, I don't have any time-wise limitation also. Therefore, sarvagato, amrito bhavet. One becomes immortal. One by knowing that as Brahman, I am immortal, imperishable. So this Atma Tirtham is the greatest Tirtham. With this, Bhagavad Pada concludes the Atma Bodha. And with this, we conclude our summary also. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om.